Welcome everyone to our Las Mujeres Valientes Fellowship virtual series kickoff. We are so excited to bring you each the much needed personal discussion on Latina leadership with our author and national community advocate, Cecilia Muñoz. This event is being brought to you by the Latino Community Foundation of Colorado, LCFC, with the support from Next 50 Initiative, and is hosted by the Las Mujeres Valientes Senior Fellows, a fellowship of LCFC. Our fellows who are on here as participants are Ana Valles from Aurora, Betty Aragon Mitotes from Fort Collins, Berna Hostetter from Alamosa, Dolores Briseda from Fort Morgan, Francis Coleman from Denver, and Patricia Varela Rivera, who handles our fellows statewide. I'd also like to thank our LCFC staff, my colleagues, for all of their help in putting this event together. The Las Mujeres Valientes Fellowship was inspired by women of wisdom, Latinas 50+. The Las Mujeres Valientes is a statewide fellowship which was created to reduce ageism, promote health and well-being, create shared learning environments, and transfer knowledge and wisdom so that all generations of Latinas can thrive. Before we start, I want to follow a few housekeeping items. We have simultaneous translation available for our Spanish-speaking participants. Indira Guzman, founder of the Community Language Cooperative, has joined us today and will be our interpreter for this event. If you have concerns regarding translation or need translation services, please, or interpretation services, I'm sorry, please put your concerns into the chat box and we'll make sure that our colleagues take care of that. Also, all participants have been muted to avoid any noise or disturbance during the discussion. We have planned for questions and answers from participants toward the end of the hour, and we'll be asking you to use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screens to ask your questions. So before we begin, I'm excited and curious to find out who's out there, who the participants are for today. So we're going to conduct a few quick questions, a few poll questions, so that we can get an idea of the landscape and of the participants. So I'm going to have my colleague Marisa bring up the first poll question for you to answer. What generation do you belong to? I'll let you take a moment to answer that. All right, let's see what we've got. Wow, looks like we have a good mixture. We have majority baby boomers. We've got some generation Y and also Generation X. We even have some amazing members of what's called or considered our silent generation. And we even have a few Generation Z as well. Great to know. Question or poll question number 2. Where are you located? I'll give you a moment to put your answers in there. Okay. All right, let's see what responses we have. Wow, huge group of folks from Denver, some folks from the Front Range, even some from the Western Slope, the San Luis Valley. Well, we've got a good representation of the whole state, Eastern Plains, and as well as some other folks who are probably from out of state and outside of Colorado. Thank you everyone for joining us. Let's go to poll, the last one, poll number 3, please. Question, what level of leadership journey are you in? We're going to give you a little bit of time to put your answers in here. All right. Let's see. What level of leadership do we have? Let's go ahead and see if everybody's answered and where we're at with that. Wow. Okay. We've got. It's always great. We have some people who are just beginning their leadership journey, as well as a pretty even portion of intermediate and some experts. So this is great. This is going to be a wonderful discussion. Great. Well, now, without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce two amazing Latina leaders. First, one of the visionaries behind the creation and the development of the Las Mujeres Valientes Fellowship, Ms. Patricia Varela Rivera, or as many people know her, PBR. Patricia is a senior managing fellow, and she will be moderating this discussion with Cecilia. Next, I would like to introduce our special guest of honor, a friend, someone who I call a friend, our speaker, Cecilia Muñoz. She's the Vice President of Public Interest Technology and Local Initiatives at New America. Prior to joining New America in 2017, she served for 8 years on the President Obama senior staff, first as Director of Intergovernmental Affairs, followed by 5 years as Director of the Domestic Policy Council. And she's only 20 years old, if you can believe that now. Before working for government, she was a senior vice president at the National Council of La Raza, now Unidos US. That's where I met her and had an opportunity to work with her. It's the nation's largest Hispanic policy and advocacy organization, where she served for 20 years. Cecilia is also a senior fellow at Results for America, a nonprofit that advances the use of data and evidence in policymaking, and she received a MacArthur Fellowship in 2000 for her work on immigration and civil rights. Cecilia is a Detroit native and the daughter of immigrants from Bolivia. She is also a wife and a mother of 2 amazing and beautiful grown daughters. So without further ado, I am going to introduce or bring on screen.
Thank you, Rachel. And I want to thank our 5 Las Mujeres Valientes fellows from all over the state. And I want to thank every one of you for being on today. Bienvenidas. This is going to be, we're going to have a great discussion for about an hour. And we have a very, very special guest. Hello, Cecilia. How are you today?
Hi, PBR. Thank you so much for having me. And thanks to Rachel for setting all of this up, and to our participants for participating. I've been so looking forward to this.
Well, this is great. We're really excited because Cecilia wrote a book called More Than Ready, Be Strong and Be You, and she's going to talk about lessons for women of color on the rise. All of the fellows, including myself, even Rachel, and the staff, read your book, Cecilia, and I've got to tell you, it was really good, very impressive, because it talked about your personal and professional life, and a lot of us could really relate to it. So it's nice to see it down in black and white, instead of just thinking about all these things that we've been through all our lives. So Cecilia, the first question I want to ask you is, why did you write this book?
Yeah, so thank you so much for doing this, and I'm so thrilled that you enjoyed the book. The whole reason I wrote it is because I think the world is ready for the leadership that women of color, and particularly Latinos, provide. And I think sometimes we hesitate before we provide it. I know that's true for me, and I think I'm not alone in that. So I worked, as you heard Rachel describe, I worked in the White House for 8 years under President Obama. And when I left the White House, a lot of people who leave those kinds of jobs write books, they write memoirs. And I was not thinking that I was going to do that when I left the White House. I, found other work that I hoped would be useful to the world, and I kind of kept my head down to do my work, and which is kind of what women do. And a lot of, frankly, the men that I worked with, including men that, that are young enough to be my children were writing books and starting podcasts and doing other important things to get their voices out. And they are important voices. And I'm glad they did that. But their voice is very different than my voice. And I thought about that, and a couple women in my life really pushed me. And they said, you know, you're doing what women do. You're keeping your head down and you're letting other people do the talking. And, you know, that's not enough anymore. We have to do our own talking. And you should think about what you have to say. And you should think about who you want to say it to. And so I did. And I realized that I do a lot of public speaking. And I talk to people, especially, I mean, I guess at all stages of their career, but especially folks who are starting out. And I tell the same stories from across my career, and because I think they're the ones that resonate. And invariably, someone comes up to me afterwards, and 100% of the time, that person is a woman. And most of the time, she's a woman of color. And she'll say to me, that story you told about that time that you doubted yourself, or that thing you said about what it's like when you're the only one in the room, that's me all the time. And I kind of thought I was the only one. And which made me realize we have a lot of commonality of experience, but we don't talk about it. And so we're all kind of going through it alone. And there's no reason to go through it alone. It's time to start talking about the experiences that we share. And I interviewed 7 other women of color, some Indigenous women, some African-American women, some Asian American women. And, you know, our experiences have a lot in common, and the strategies that we adopt also have a lot in common. And I thought it was time to share that with other women, time to get this conversation started.
You're absolutely right, because every time I read one of your pages about being in the White House, I think so many of us Latinas feel so alone. And it's very difficult because we're all basically going through the same thing.
Yeah, that's right.
And it's so great that you wrote about that. So let me start with some questions from our fellows.
Okay.
And there's a question from Ana Baez, who's in Aurora. And she asked, how important is it not to mix leadership with your feelings?
What a wonderful question.
It is.
You know, I think the challenge is getting the balance right. I don't think I would ever argue not to have your feelings be part of it, because, you know, as Latinas, we bring experience that's really important. Our life experience, the experience in our community is important, and that's all connected up to our feelings. But at the same time, I have found in order to really be heard, in order to really be effective, I need more than just my feelings. I need data. I need evidence. I need to be able to show that if I'm saying, look, our community needs you to do this, then my experience matters. That gives me authority to say that, but it helps if I can also back it up with evidence, with information, with data. So I guess the answer I would give to that question is that you have to strike a balance, but don't discount that your feelings are important, and that inner wisdom that you have is essential. And invariably, and this is part of the point of the book, what we bring is unique and special, and the people that we're sitting with need it. They may not know that they need it, but they do. And so it's important for us to walk in understanding that they need it.
Yeah, you're right. You know, because I think one of the things that we as women lose is our great intuition that we have. And I think that's really important because we have it innate in us, and our culture has taught us to be respectful and not to be seen, not to be heard, but be seen. And it's all those cultural pieces that we carry with us. But after a while, I think the feelings and the way that we're raised as women really makes us unique, especially sitting at the table with a lot of white men or men that don't have those feelings.
That's right. And frankly,
Yes.
in the White House, right, I was the first woman to be a president's domestic policy advisor. So I would sit at those tables and think, gosh, the other people sitting here, most of whom were men, and a lot of them were white. They must know stuff that I don't know. They're the kinds of people who have been in these kinds of jobs. And so my default was, they must know stuff that I don't know. And I had to remind myself, they might know stuff that I don't know, but I also know stuff that they don't know. And if we're going to do a good job, I need to have confidence in asserting what I know, especially when it's hard, especially when they don't want to hear it. It's important to trust that we know what we're talking about, especially when it comes to our own experience.
Exactly, exactly. Great. Next question is from Betty Aragon Mitotas, and she's one of our fellows from Fort Collins. And Betty has a really interesting question. She says that she'd like your advice, Cecilia. And what she says that she was raised growing up and not being taught Spanish.
Mm-hmm.
And in your book, you talk about that. And so she says mainly they speak Spanglish,
Yes.
which a lot of us do, right? I'm from New Mexico, so I know. We use English and the Spanish, and it's kind of fun.
It's right. It's kind of like our native language in a way.
It is. It is. And she says, I feel inadequate when I'm in a group that speak fluently. We are all working toward the same goal to help our people. They see me differently. How would you advise to help her prove my worth even though I do not speak fluently?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
This is common. You know, our community, first of all, is enormous, and it's very diverse. And speaking Spanish is one of the markers of who we are, but we don't all speak it. And of course, some of us have families that go back many generations, and including generations where the government tried to squash the language out of us, right?
Right.
So we're descendants of all of that experience, and it's all valid, right? Not speaking Spanish perfectly or not speaking Spanish at all doesn't make you less Latina. It makes you a Latina with a particular history. You know, I worked with people when I was at the National Council of La Raza, which is now called Unidos US. I worked with people whose parents were immigrants, but whose parents insisted that they speak English and were nervous about them speaking Spanish because they thought it would make people look down on them. So there's no fault to be ascribed to speaking it well or not speaking it well. It's not a matter of blame. It's not a matter of fault. And it's not a matter of worth, right? So the way Betty phrased the question, how do I prove my worth if I'm not great at the language? And the answer is believe in your worth. Your ability to speak Spanish isn't the only marker of your worth. What the work that you are engaging in, the fact that you are working to engage the portions of our community that are Spanish speaking, that's a sign of worth. Your skill in doing it, that's a sign of worth. The fact that you see yourself as connected and that we're one community and we're working to serve each other, that's a sign of your worth. So have confidence in that and don't let anybody judge you. I used to get judged by some of my former colleagues because I wasn't Mexican American, right? And my specialty is immigration policy. And I've had people say to me, what business do you have talking about immigration if you're not Mexican? And the answer to that is, well, I'm the daughter of immigrants. I know what my family's experience is, and I'm making sure to be well educated on other people, on the experience of others in our community. So I'm not pretending to be something that I'm not, but I have an expansive view of who we are as a community because we're an expansive community. We bring a lot of different backgrounds, and it's all valid. It all counts.
Yeah, I was going to say, we need to value each other, whether we speak Spanish or not, because I know there's a lot of people that judge us if we are not eloquent in Spanish or even in English. And that I think we have to really look at differently. Don't you agree, Cecilia, that our culture is our base of who we are in our hearts and our souls? And, if you can't speak it and speak it fluently, you're still a Latina.
Of course.
Right? Does that make sense?
It absolutely does. It absolutely does. And the more, there's a lot of this that happens in lots of communities that happens on the basis of language, that happens on the basis of color, right? That on the basis of, did you grow up in modest circumstances or not in modest circumstances? And it's as if we are saying you have to fit a particular mold in order to really count.
Right.
And that's too limited. And we all have something to contribute, and we all have something to learn from each other. And I think it's important to model that kind of approach.
I agree. Yeah, you're absolutely right. So let's go on to the next question. And then if you could speak up a little more,
Okay.
Cecilia. Okay, great. So this is from Berna Hostetter, and Berna is one of our fellows from Alamosa. And her question is, she says, in your book, you talked about fear while you worked at the White House under the Obama administration. Now that you look back, was it worth it? Why or why not?
Oh, I love this question. So yes, it was absolutely worth it. And it was scary sometimes. I mean, you know, we also had a pandemic in the early years of the administration. We had an epic economic downturn in the early years.
Right.
There was a lot that was scary.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I would toss and turn. I mean, I carried a lot of worries. It's, aside from raising children, it's the hardest thing I've ever done. And I wouldn't trade it for anything. I learned so much. And, you know, I had several people say to me, you know, if the next job that you take doesn't scare you a little bit, then why are you taking it? So that turned out to be very good advice, because the fact that I was able to meet the challenges in front of me, and sometimes I didn't know if I was going to. A lot of the time I wasn't sure that I could, but I did. And that has given me a degree of confidence and a degree of fearlessness, which I will never lose. So yeah, it was absolutely worth it. And that's not to say that we succeeded in everything we tried to do. We most certainly didn't. And that's not to say that I didn't receive a lot of criticism, and maybe some of it was deserved. But the opportunity to serve is a privilege, and I wouldn't trade it for the world. It was absolutely worth it.
I bet. I mean, because I know in reading the book, that those were the chapters that really that I felt really comfortable with, in terms of saying, my God, she experienced what I experienced. And being the only one in the room. Yeah. Because I've experienced, and I'm sure a lot of women that are on this call, you feel alone, and you say, is this going to be worth it or not? But you know, it's amazing when you go through all that turmoil, how it makes us grow.
Yes.
And how it teaches us, right, Cecilia?
Absolutely. And I think anyone who's on this call who takes on something that scares them a little bit will find a capacity that they didn't know that they had.
Exactly. You know, the other thing too I wanted to mention, I think when we're the first or the only in the room, and I don't know if you agree with this or not, but I didn't have a mentor. Mm-hmm. Because I was afraid to ask anyone to mentor me, because I would feel like they would think I was stupid. Mm-hmm. Or, you know, not understanding the organizational culture.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that in my last job, the one I retired from, it was a great job. I loved it, but it was a pretty scary job. It was like you. How don't you feel that we need to start asking for help?
Yes,
and advice?
Yes. In fact, that's one of the pieces of advice that I give in the book, particularly when it comes to the times when you doubt yourself, or when you can tell that the people around you think that maybe you don't belong in your job. That one of the strategies that I used, but also the 7 other women that I interviewed in preparing the book, what they said, strategies that we all used included asking for feedback. Finding someone whose opinion you trust, finding someone who isn't going to hold it against you, and ask them, how am I doing? How is this going? You know, I had a colleague, whose name is Valerie Jarrett. She was President and Mrs. Obama's very close friend.
Right.
She was someone I could go into her office and close the door and say, boy, that meeting didn't go well, and I'm not quite sure where I went off course. and I knew she would tell me the truth. And so finding the people who are, and that doesn't have to be people who are older or people who are your bosses. It can be, I used to ask the people who reported to me for feedback, and I got excellent feedback because they could see things that I couldn't see.
Right.
So yes, asking for feedback is incredibly important if you want to move forward, if you want to up your game.
Right. Even if it's bad feedback. I mean, that's sometimes the hardest to take is the bad. I mean, and I'm one of those, my God, you look at me wrong and I'll start crying. That was then, not now, not anymore. But
well, we think of it as a sign of weakness to
yes.
ask for guidance, but it's actually a sign of strength. What it communicates is I'm on a path to improvement all the time. I'm always trying to up my game, to elevate.
Right.
It's a sign of strength. And getting, having somebody say to you, you could have done this better, they're doing you a favor.
They are. It makes you better. And it makes you tougher too, which is really good. Well, thank you. Okay, so here's another question. This is from Dolores Brasida, and Dolores is from Fort Morgan. And her question is, as Latinas, we were taught to be humble and not boastful about ourselves and in terms of our accomplishments. And so her question basically is how do you balance this? And culturally we always say, se cree muy faceta, se cree que sabe todo, right? If we boast about our accomplishments or what we've done. So how do we balance that out, Cecilia? Because there's a very fine line there of being boastful, but yet just being honest.
Sure.
What's your thought on that?
I was raised the same way.
Yeah.
Not to take up a lot of space in the room, not to be boastful, and I'm not boastful. There are definitely times.
Can you speak up a little more, honey?
There are definitely times when this sense of trying not to take up all the oxygen in the room,
right,
can feel like a hindrance, right?
Right.
But you don't have to be boastful to be successful. But it's also not boastful to just be honest about saying we were here and here's what we accomplished. We got here.
Right.
I find that it's useful to talk about not just, I don't own accomplishments myself. There are very few things you accomplish by yourself.
Right.
My accomplishments have happened in teams, and it feels, it's more consistent with my upbringing to talk about what my team has accomplished, because that doesn't feel boastful to me, right? And so there are ways of elevating your work that are not about just elevating yourself, but that are about lifting up your team, lifting up your approach, showing that you set a goal and you met it. That's about the accomplishment. That's ultimately not about you. And I find that I've been successful without having to be boastful, in part because I'm about building teams.
That's yeah, you're right. One of the things is that you were raised with you're seen but not heard, and that has a lot to do with how we view ourselves. And it's difficult as you go up that ladder of success, not to be that boastful, but to create, to be humble. But the other thing is I think when you give your team or other people credit, it makes you look better. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Yeah.
Right. But it positions you as the kind of leader who is thinking about others.
Exactly. Instead of just your own agenda.
Right.
Because there's a lot of people that have their own agenda, and they know that they didn't get there by themselves.
Well, and look, I live and work in Washington. Washington is full of self-promoters, but and sometimes it works for them. But but only to a point. And the people that I have seen be most successful are the kinds of people who are generous leaders, who lift up others and
Exactly.
not just themselves.
Exactly. Exactly. Okay, here's another question. And this is from Fran Coleman. And Fran, who was a state legislator for the state of Colorado, and she's here in Denver. And her question is, she says, this is a really interesting question, Cecilia. I think you're going to smile when you hear this. Very interesting. It says, you had exposure to music like Beethoven. Remember your father? You talked about your father. And it is said that people who have music in their lives are actually brighter. Do you think this applies to you, and how?
Oh, wow. So my name is Maria Cecilia. I was named Cecilia because Santa Cecilia is the patron saint of music. My parents were hoping for a musician, and they got one. I am a musician.
What do you play?
I grew up playing the flute and singing, and I still sing.
Wow.
And, you know, I don't know if it makes me smarter, but it does give me another avenue for connecting to things that are important. I think of music as it's like a pathway straight to your heart that doesn't go through your head. And that just gives you extra dimensions that I think are important. And I find now in this period of crisis that we're in, I'm turning to music a fair amount as a way to cope. And it helps.
Yeah, you know what? It's an outlet also. You know, a lot of us Latinas, we love to dance. And we love salsa and cha-cha and all our great music. And you're right. I think dancing for us really helps us get rid of a lot of stress too.
Yeah,
but you know, I was telling Rachel earlier before we got on the call that my grandfather, my mom and dad and we lived with my grandpa, and grandpa played the mandolin for me every night. And I'm thinking, you know, what great memories. I didn't realize at the time what it was doing, but it also makes you realize that the arts, you know, really, really bring a wonderful calming sense to our lives.
Yeah, it's true. They are especially important in times of crisis.
Great, you're right. You're right. So here's my question. Okay, is that when you talked about the different chiefs of staff and the men that surrounded the president, that was really difficult for you. And they were all white men, right?
Yeah.
And so because a lot of us deal in that kind of a cultural workplace, how did you deal with them in terms of, you know, that you want to be heard, or that you want to be appreciated, or you don't want to be a friend necessarily, but you want to be respected and valued.
Yeah.
And when you're the only one in the room and you're a Latina, how did you cope with that? How did you do that?
So I served under 5 chiefs of staff. One of them was Asian American, actually, but the others were white. And some of them respected me more than others. But it helped a lot that I knew I was working for a president who respected me. And that's pretty good.
Yes.
You know, you can take that all the way to the bank.
So exactly.
In moments of doubt, and I certainly had them, you know, as you know from the book, one of those chiefs of staff went on to tell a couple of reporters that he was disappointed that I got promoted and gave them the impression that I wasn't qualified for my job. So I mean, for all of them, I had to walk in knowing that the president had confidence in me, and that I had confidence in my own knowledge and in my own ability, and that confidence was more important than what they thought about me. And that worked for me. I can't say it worked every single day. There were days when I was racked with doubt, especially after that kind of very public you know, event of one chief of staff suggesting that maybe I didn't belong. But he wasn't right about that.
Right.
I proved that he wasn't right about it. I was in that job for 5 years. I served longer longer than anybody else who's been a president's domestic policy advisor. And I accomplished a lot in those 5 years. So it goes back to, you can't rely on what other people think about you for your sense of worth.
Exactly.
You have to rely on your own inner sense. And you have to work at it, right? You have to do the work to make sure that you that you don't make a mistake, that you know your material, that you can do your job well. I worked incredibly hard at that job, and I really felt like a mistake, and this is true for women of color. If we make a mistake, it feels costlier for us than it is for other people. And so we work really hard. That's part of why my book is called More Than Ready. Part of it is because I think the world is more than ready for what we offer, but it's also because we over-prepare, right? Because we know we have to be on top of it, because people won't give us the benefit of the doubt.
Exactly. And that has to be like 300%, right?
Oh, yes.
It can't be just 100%. And it's unfortunate because, I always tell women, we just, you're in the position, you better really set your mind. You're going to work really hard to prove yourself, because you want other women, other Latinas to come after you.
That's right. And some people like to say, fake it until you make it. That doesn't work for a person of color.
It doesn't.
You have to be on top of it. That means you have to do the work.
Exactly. And that's working long hours. And I mean, it really takes a lot. It takes it takes your entire essence.
Yeah, I think that's
it does. True. Yeah. So there's another question that I'd like to ask you. And this is when you were in high school. Did you ever imagine that you would be doing this line of work ever? And
no.
What were you didn't, what were you looking at when you were in high school? I
thought that I was going to be work at a social service agency, like which I still think is wonderful, admirable work, like the kind of place where people come for help and the agency that gives help. And I when I finished graduate school, I got that kind of a job, and we served a lot of people, but the job made me miserable because I didn't have the inner strength to let go when there were people that we couldn't help. So I learned that was not the right path for me, because the job was taking a lot out of me, but kind of not putting anything in. But I learned in that job that I was a really good advocate. And advocacy is just as hard, but I was energized by it. And so when I give advice to younger people, one, I make sure they know it's okay to choose one course and discover it's not for you, and then to change course. But also that what you're looking for is a way to make a difference that also fills you up. And that it's unsustainable over a lifetime if your work only depletes you.
You're right. You're right. That's great. Well, we have what we'd like to do now is go into some questions and answers from our participants that are on Zoom.
Okay.
And I want to ask you some of these questions.
Okay. So, and I'm going to get out of the sun. So there we go.
Okay, so the first question, Cecilia, is from Yolanda Ortega, who is a dear friend of mine. She's here in Denver. And her question is, would you speak to the transition or transformation of leadership effectiveness and growth as we become older?
Oh.
Like elders, we are now looking at experiences of ageism. Boy, that's a good question.
Yeah.
Cecilia?
I think about this all the time, because part of my COVID experience is that I'm letting my hair go. It's natural.
Oh, yes. Yes, I know.
And so I really do think about, okay, so are people going to take me less seriously because they see me as being older?
Right.
And there's this thing that happens, right, that as you get older, you become sort of invisible. And but the other thing that you become is you really do realize that your life experience adds up to wisdom. And I'm finding that there's certain things that I used to care about that I just don't care about anymore.
Amen. Amen. Right? Yeah.
And so there is a little bit of there's a little bit of an advantage to being invisible that you can use, right? People don't expect us to be
Right.
firm and knowledgeable and
Right.
eloquent, but of course we are. And so I'm finding in my own leadership journey as I age, that I get stronger in certain ways. And I there's certain stuff that I used to care about that just doesn't bother me anymore.
Amen. I was just going to say, you know what? That's why we're called women of wisdom, because I don't like the word that we use culture, like una vieja, esa no vieja, or, you know, we're not that old and we are letting our hair go gray, because you know what? We should feel really good about who we are, because we have so many great experiences. And and let me tell you, we need to be we need to be valued, and
Absolutely.
we need to speak up that we do add value.
I like to think of myself as a little bit of a madrina to the women coming after me.
That's good.
And that makes a difference.
It does. It does. Okay, we're going to ask another question is from Lynn Valencia, who's also here in Denver and a good friend. She says, what advice would you give to someone who has retired and looking for what's next? How do you redirect your time to find a new passion?
So it's not just at retirement. I think at any stage, when you're looking for what's next, it matters that you find work that fills your heart up, right?
Yes.
It's something that even if it's hard, and in some ways, especially if it's hard, the thing that like wakes you up in the morning because you're thinking about it, you're trying to work through the problems because you're interested, because you're engaged, because it fills up your heart, that's the thing you want to do. I don't think the standard is I have to find something that's important, because there are lots of things that are important.
Right.
It's more, I have to find the thing that's mine to do because I have a particular skill set and I have a particular passion. And I think it's like there's a million important things you can do, but the key is to find the one that's yours to do.
Exactly. I was going to just say that I know when I left the Small Business Administration, I was the director. And when I didn't have a title anymore, and people, you know, when you have a certain title, people lift you up in certain ways, and that sort of, and when you don't have it, it was really interesting how I felt. I felt like I'm not important anymore because we value ourselves with a title. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Cecilia?
Sure.
And we can't, and that is not important anymore. I mean, we've got another life, and it took me a few months to get over myself. Does that make sense?
Of course it does, because it happens to everybody who leaves the White House. You know, we all walked out of the White House at the same time.
Yeah.
Going from some of the highest positions in the country,
right,
to something else. And it helps if you don't get caught up in your own.
Exactly. Exactly, because there's plenty of great things that we can do. Okay, we're going to get another question here. This one is from Bernice Theus, and she says, can you elaborate on why they don't give the benefit of the doubt to women?
Oh, so all of the lessons that we've learned about leadership have been handed down to us over generations when the leaders were all men and all white. So we think that there's a certain way a leader looks like, and a certain way a leader sounds, and a certain way a leader behaves, and that's been shaped by generations of men who have led. And so people aren't used to seeing us in positions of leadership. I mean, we just had a conversation about whether or not the country is prepared to elect a woman as president. You know, in this day and age, it's crazy that we're still having that conversation, but it's because we're not used to leaders whose voices sound like ours or whose bodies look like ours. And look, I'm a Latina, I'm 5 feet 2 inches tall. It is hard to have a commanding presence when you are soft-spoken, when you have been raised to be humble, and when you're, you know, bajita the way I am. And so I engage in the world with kindness. It's a way I try to live. People assume that those things mean weakness. And so that's why we don't get the benefit of the doubt, right?
Right.
A man who is white and 6 feet tall saying the same sentence that I'm saying is going to be given more credibility than me because of who he is.
Right.
And so that's what I mean when I say we don't always get the benefit of the doubt. And if we are in a room of people who are not Latinos and we say, look, if you do that, it's going to affect our community this way. I'm frequently in situations where people don't necessarily believe us, or they don't understand, or they think I'm speaking from pure emotion and not knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And some of that has to do with their assumptions about what makes women operate. They think we're more emotional than rational, which is ridiculous, but it's true. They do think that.
Yeah.
So we have all of those currents that we're swimming against.
Right.
And which is why it's important that we be prepared.
Plus, not only that, we just need more of our Latinas to be in leadership positions.
Sure.
So we can change that narrative that, we belong at the table and we're smart and we can do the job. And
course.
Absolutely. So let's see, we have another question now. And this question is from Polly Baca. What advice do you have for Latinas in Polly's another great, probably know Polly. She's fabulous. Yes, I adore Polly. Polly was one of our first Latina state senators, and she was the first Latina to speak at a Democratic convention, and Polly's the best.
Yes.
Her question is, what advice do you have for Latinas in professional positions who encountered underserved criticism, especially from our own community?
Yeah. So I'm very familiar with this. First of all, Polly, I'm honored that you're participating. I'm a huge fan.
Yes.
So this is what happens with leadership, right? I received a lot of criticism when I was in government, and I know that people who have led the way Polly has led also get criticism from our own community. And that, in a way, it hurts more, right? Because it's coming from within the family. This is one of the things I deal with in my book. And there's a very wise, one of the women I interviewed is very wise. Her name is Jody Archambault Gillette. She's a Native American woman. And what she says about this is she doesn't worry about criticism that comes from outside of her community because people don't know her and who she is. But she finds criticism from within her community painful. But she says, I think about my grandmothers, and when I'm making a decision, I think, would my grandmothers be okay with this decision? And if they would, then I know I'm fine, and I don't have to worry about what anybody else thinks. And I think that's really good advice. So I think of it as having a North Star. And if you know what you're trying to achieve with that decision, and you're motivated by the right things, even if people don't understand, and even if people criticize, then you don't have to worry about it so much because the North Star was clear. And as long as you know where the North Star is and your compass is set, then the rest of it you can let roll off of your back. That's how I approached it. And so I can't say that it didn't sting sometimes when I got criticized, but I also knew that my job was to do the best that I could do and set a clear North Star, and that's the most you can accomplish. And so I learned not to let it bother me.
Great. Okay, and maybe one last question, Cecilia.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, there's two. Oh, there's two. Okay, Elizabeth Velasco. She's asking, how can we help each other as women and lift each other up to get to those leadership positions?
Great question. So
Yes.
We need to be doing this all the time. And it doesn't matter if you are at the beginning of your leadership journey or one of the women who is super experienced. we can all be doing this for each other. So for example, the first time I testified before Congress, I was all of 26 years old. And I found out later that there were two women sitting in the back of the room who had been trailblazers themselves. And they did this incredibly generous thing. They called my boss and said, you weren't able to be there, but we were there and we saw her and she did a good job. You can be the person who does that for the women around you.
Mm-hmm.
So if you are at a table at a meeting and one of your colleagues is shining, and okay, the people she works with aren't here to see her, but I'm here to see her. There's no reason you can't shoot a note to her colleagues and say, you know what? Sarita was on fire today and you've got yourself a real star there. We can be opening doors for each other and lifting each other up, but it won't happen by itself. We have to be deliberate about doing it. That has to be part of what we accomplish.
Exactly. I always tell women who, if they're on a board or a commission or anything like that, always replace yourself with another Latina, because that's how, we bring each other along. And that's what it's about. It's about if you're in a position to do that. And I don't know about you, Cecilia, but I'm like you. I don't care anymore, and I'm going to say it. It's like, and a lot of the women on the call know that I'm pretty assertive and aggressive about this, that I say, you know what? I want to be replaced by a Latina, and I will help you. I will recruit women for you, because a lot of these organizations don't know our community, right?
Yeah. And be the person who says, hey, how come I'm the only one? Like, really? You couldn't find, in the state of Colorado, you couldn't find more than one?
Yes. Okay, we're going to go to one more question and then ask for some closing remarks. So this is from Maria Arias. Hello, Maria. She's also from Denver. She just moved here, and she's wonderful too. She's a great leader. She said, I agree that it's important to speak about team accomplishments when it's difficult to self-promote. But is it important to learn how to speak about our accomplishments? Do you have any tips for the group on how to do so? Or did you have any other allies/women support you and comment on your accomplishments? Some of us use the latter when we too were brought up to be humble.
Yes. So I did have people speaking for me and standing up for me, including the president, including Valerie Jarrett, and including my colleagues at NCLR when I was there. We were good at lifting each other up, and I'm grateful, so grateful for it.
Mm-hmm.
I also think it's interesting. I'm promoting a book, and I find it excruciatingly uncomfortable to talk about it because it feels like self-promotion, which is not the thing we were raised to do. And so, but if the book is going to reach the women I wrote it for, I have to do this. And so it helps, again, what helps me is to understand the purpose, that the purpose is not about me. The purpose is about the work that I'm trying to achieve. I'm really good at being an advocate for somebody else. I'm much less good at being an advocate for myself. But if I can convert that into an objective that's about advancing the community, about advancing the common good, then I'm not it doesn't feel like self-promoting. It feels like accomplishing that greater good. So that's how I do it. And frankly, I have to practice to be good at it and push through those feelings of discomfort. So, I'm that person you'll see in her car as she's driving and talking to myself. What I'm doing is practicing. The things which are uncomfortable, I practice so that I can be good.
Good. Do we want to go to one more question?
Right.
Do we have time?
Right here. One more.
One more. Okay. This is from Cece Ortiz, who's another dear friend, and she's also a leader in our community. Her question is, in the future, what would you say is one of the greatest opportunities and biggest challenge facing Latinas in our country? Great question, Cece.
Wow. There are a lot, but I actually think this leadership question is a big one. So far, we've had Hilda Solis serve as Secretary of Labor, and we've had a handful of Latinas serve in the Small Business Administration, which has sometimes been a cabinet position and sometimes not. We've had a few senators, a few governors, you know, a number of legislators in the House of Representatives and in state legislatures. We've had very few CEOs of companies. We are not in leadership positions to the extent that we deserve. We are the largest minority in the country.
Yes.
And in 2060, women of color will be the majority of women in the United States. And we're going to be the largest group among that cohort.
Mm-hmm.
The decisions which affect our lives are being made by other people who don't understand us, some of whom don't care about us. And it's time to change that. So I think that's the big challenge. And this is why I wrote the book. It's time for us to step up. And in order to do that, we have to start by believing in ourselves. No one's going to hand this to us. We have to take it. And having the courage and the strength to take it, especially when we are raised to be humble, requires strength that I know that we have. And I know that we have it because my abuelita had it, and my mother had it, and my sister has it, and my madrina has it, you know? Like, of course we have it. We've been knitting together family and community for generations, since the beginning of time. That's leadership. That's what leadership looks like. So it's time to believe in that for our leadership in the country and on the planet. The country needs us right now.
Absolutely. That's why we need to vote. So that's all of our questions for this call. But Cecilia, we want you to leave us with some of your own remarks on, you know, on what are your thoughts? What would you like to say to our women on this call?
So first of all, thank you for investing in your own leadership. The fact that you're even on this call is a really good sign, and I so appreciate that you all pulled it together. That the Community Foundation and that you, PBR, and Rachel are running this leadership program, and that you're connecting Latinas all across the state. Here's the thing: the world is a mess right now. The country is a mess right now. We are enduring a crisis which is unnecessarily bad, and it is affecting our community worse than other communities. Our very lives are on the line in this moment.
Right.
It could not be more serious. And the way to change things, I mean, we have in our hands the capacity to change things. We are already the leaders that we need. So while it's important to think about sharpening your skills and building your network and strengthening your capacity to lead, never doubt that you already have what it takes. And that's really the reason that I wrote the book. It's time that we recognize ourselves as the leaders that we already are, because the country needs us right now. So I'm so grateful to be part of this conversation. To the extent people are interested in the book, I'm encouraging folks to get it from an independent bookseller, because they need us right now too.
Mm-hmm.
So places like indiebound.org or bookshop.org are places that you can get it from an independent bookseller that, you know, in your area. But most of all, invest in yourselves and in each other, because we really are the answer. And I'm just so grateful to be part of this conversation. Thank you so much. Muchísimas gracias a todos.
Thank you. Thank you for taking the time. And more than anything, Cecilia, you know, when putting your thoughts on paper and to help us and to guide us so that we can come together and learn more from each other. Muchísimas gracias a usted. We really appreciate you and your time and your experience. And you are a mujer valiente.
Gracias. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. But I just want to close and thank our fellows from around the state, and of course our participants. And we want to make sure to invite you. Every month we are going to be doing a virtual call with different individuals, even a little bit of training. So if you have any ideas, please let us know. And we have a website, don't we, that you could get on. And it's LatinoCFC.org. It's LatinoCFC.org. And you can follow us on Facebook. But have a great day, and we'll see you next month. Adiós y muchas gracias.
Gracias a todos.
Gracias, Cecilia.